but today. Léonard Roussel, multimedia experience designer over at Arup, doing some amazing work. I will hand it off to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Leo. Thanks for coming. This is where you can find me online, hear a bit more about my work. Yes, I'm a multimedia experience designer, but also kind of any random combination of those words that you see on the screen. Creative technologist, multimedia engineer, experience designer. Mostly due to the fact that I can't quite pin in a couple of words what I do. So if you too struggle with defining your activity, please get in touch and we can talk about it. Put that in the chat. So anyway, I'm here today to talk about my practice doing experience design for the built environment. So I'm going to go a little bit about my background and how I got into it, how we generally do this at Arup, and a couple project examples. So I started my career in a research institute in Paris called IRCAM, which is doing acoustics and music research. I was in the spatial audio team. So developing a tool for Max MSP called SPAT, which is a spatialization engine for Max MSP. And around that time was tinkering with a lot of the tools that a lot of you I'm sure will recognize and have tinkered with, processing open frameworks and the Cinders of the world, but also a few more maybe acoustics and sound oriented one like Pure Data, Max, and Sound Collider, or some of the digital audio workstations that you might recognize from the bottom there. Produced a couple installations in public spaces in light festivals, generally in Berlin in 2013, and Lyon at Fête des Lumières in 2013 as well, same year. Doing sort of a sculptural light generative audio combination work. And this was kind of my entry into doing multimedia into the built environment. And then I joined Arup. So Arup, as some of you might know, is an independent global design and engineering consultancy for the built environment, who's involved in all sorts of projects around the world, but particularly good at large-scale, complex, sort of challenging coordination, multidisciplinary type problems, and famously did the Sydney Opera House right around the time where our founder of Arup, who is projected on that roof there, sort of handed over the company from the partners to trust at the benefit of the employees, which makes it Arup an employee-owned company, kind of like a co-op. And that's right around the time where he developed the sort of key principles that the company would move forward with, one of which is total architecture, which we refer now to as total design, which is the general idea that, like I was saying, multiple technical specialties really click together to answer a set of very unique challenges for each project and delivering a holistic and bespoke solution for those. So a couple more examples local to New York, because that's where I am, but that's just a few examples. Little Island with Heatherwick, the Gilder Center with Studio Gang, or the Fulton Transit Center in downtown Manhattan with Grimshaw. For these projects, generally, this is the loop, right? And this is true of most projects. I'm sure the starts with feasibility, strategy, or concept. Arup generally comes in somewhere between concept and design, but more and more we're involved too further up this chain. And the design goes to construction, goes to operations, where we typically sort of let the teams run, but we are sometimes involved in operation and maintenance, and then the feedback loop comes around. And so if we're talking about user experience, generally there's a phase of user research that happens on or around the strategy phase, as I'm sure you know. And so I wanted to use this project as an example. So if you're not familiar with it, this is the main transit hub in New York City for the subway. And most of the lines sort of converge there. And it was a challenging one to be built after Sandy and 9/11 that brought all sorts of challenges to downtown. And I'll say right now, this is quite presumptuous for me to talk about this project because I didn't work on it. This predates my involvement at Arup, but I do think it's an interesting example as a case study, because the main question that, of course, you're going to ask yourself if you're doing user experience in the built environment is, who are the users, right? Who you're trying to serve. And we tend to generally focus on, okay, it's a transit hub, so we're going to focus on the commuters. But there's actually so many other users that are involved in here, right? So people that might just be passing through, people that don't even take the train at all, people that live there, people that need a warm place to stay at night, or of course the staff, the operators, etc. And even I'll expand to the non-human if we have a little more time at the end of this presentation. So all of these sort of multi-dimensional slicing of the user cake operates under a multivariate system that includes, but of course not limited to, all these variables on the right. So the age and the abilities of each person sort of falls on that spectrum. But the goal of good experience design, or good design at the service of experience, is to expand the spectrum for which this design is applicable, and so that the broader range of users will be able to efficiently and comfortably use the space. And so this falls under what we call universal design, where all these aspects of a person's identity and traits affect their experience of the world and the built environment. It includes all elements of accessibility, but not only, right? It includes anything that's sort of less tangible, perhaps, or things related to cultural background or socioeconomic background. And the I lost my train of thought, but anyway, so that's really what we refer to as experience, universal design, and it allows to move from, in the context of abilities or body abilities, to move from a medical model to a social model, right? So the disability is not something that's inherent to a person, but it's the environment that disables people by the way it's designed. And is the lighting level high enough for this person to read the sign at the subway station, or is the turnstile wide enough for somebody to go through? Nobody said that turnstiles was supposed to be a certain width. I mean, there's codes and standard, but this is all human invention, and so we made those decisions, and we need to realize that every design decision has tremendous impact on the users at the end of the day, and especially for challenging projects that see hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of passengers throughout the day, or users throughout the day. And so one sort of cool case example of this is hostile architecture, right? And so those spaces that have been intentionally designed to exclude some users. So we're not just omitting some of the users on that spectrum, we're intentionally designing against them, which is sort of the worst way to do user experience design, but it's very much user experience design in the built environment. So on the top left are anti-panhandler devices or anti-skateboarders on the top, and this is the clip from a New York Times article that I thought was quite good. And so yeah, user experience design at its worst, but very much user experience design. So thinking about how every design decision affects the life of the people that we're designing for. So back to the transit center. This is the list on the left of the services that Arup provided, which is only one part of the design team, right? There's a bunch of other technical disciplines that are involved that all have to coordinate and iterate with one another internally, like among the Arup disciplines, but also with other designers on the project. And so I see at least the building design team as kind of like a complex system requiring careful oiling and coordination. And typically that's the job of the architect, who federates all that coordination. And they need to know enough about all of these technical things to be able to understand how it all clicks together and then report to the owner or stakeholders, or whatever the case might be. And that's just the design team, right? Like we have other teams that are their own system. And so we're starting to see a system of systems in the built environment, because the design team is only one of the systems involved, and all those systems need to talk together to feed into one another, to create, this is the Fulton Center seen from the outside, to create those built environments, but also how does that fit within the other systems around it? So it's like a sort of fractal model of systems in that sense. And leads me to my favorite Jenny Holzer quote, which is that all things are delicately interconnected, and it's so good you can get it as a T-shirt at Mass Mocha. Actually, I did look for the T-shirt that I bought, but I couldn't find it. I think it shrunk or something. So, speaking of Jenny Holzer, and this is the first in a series of questionable segues in this presentation, but I hope you'll forgive me. So, I'm going to use this to go into a few projects that I worked on over the years. So, this was at the New York City AIDS Memorial, which is at St. Vincent Triangle on the West Village. It's a light and style installation. Jenny Holzer, that was before our involvement, designed the Walt Whitman poem that was engraved in the stone on the ground. It was reading historical texts and poems related to the AIDS epidemic, but also reading people's names throughout the day of people lost from to AIDS from the 80s till the present day. This is one of the first projects I worked on at Arup in New York. This is in rural Montana in an art center, kind of like a giant like land art center, kind of Storm King on steroids. That also have an advanced musical programming, and they're called Tippett Rise Art Center. It's breathtaking views of the Montana landscape. I've never seen something more beautiful in my life, actually. And we designed this
webinar. I can stop. Yeah, anytime. Yeah.
We designed this performance shell, timber performance shell, and the goal was to optimize the acoustics at the audience without compromising the view. And so for that, we used a sort of 3D optimization algorithm using Rhino and Grasshopper, using the ray tracing approximation for early sound reflections, and trying to maximize how much sound energy would go back to the seats without blocking the view. Worked on public records after that, did the acoustic design for the first sound room at public records. I'm going a little bit heavy on the sound stuff because that's how I started. And some of those acoustic projects at Arup, it's also because it's one of the things that Arup does very well, but some of the acoustic projects at Arup are supported by this room we call the Sound Lab, which is a immersive acoustic design tool where we can create or recreate or simulate acoustic environment from other locations around the world, or things that are not built yet. And there's one generally in every office where we have acoustics, so we can have interoperability between the content that way. So more multimedia pieces. I did the soundscape design part of Arup's general contract of doing all the AV design for the Salesforce lobbies in San Francisco and New York. There's a multi-channel soundscape inspired by Redwood Forest. This is an exhibit about the life and career of Lou Reed at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts 3 years ago. The part of this, the exhibit was bigger than this, but we designed this listening room that had an Ambisonics multi-channel audio system and multi-channel video that was playing back some unreleased backstage material, among other things. I'm sure you've heard of this project. So Arup did the full AV design for the Sphere, the bowl, the atrium, and some of the auxiliary spaces. I love telling this story because I worked on one part of the audio system that I hope you never get to experience. I worked on the emergency audio evacuation system for the bowl and the atrium. So these are screenshots of the sound pressure level and intelligibility levels at the bowl. So if you can read, it shows basically that everything is blue, which means good, which is what's required to pass. But basically, don't sit on this seat. I'm just kidding. But that's sort of my point here, right? Is that I worked on something that hopefully nobody will get to experience, and that's just one example of all this stuff that goes into designing the built environment that nobody will ever get to experience. In fact, you only get to experience this when it's broken or badly designed. And so having this sort of goal of doing our design work and putting a whole lot of care into designing the things that are meant to never be noticed, I think is actually quite poetic and quite interesting with the engineering work that we do at Arup. So back to Fulton Center, this principle applies to a project like this, of course, right? But this what we can see, but there's all the other stuff that we can't see. For example, I'm not seeing all the air distribution, or I'm not seeing all the IT cabling that goes into this, right? It's been carefully coordinated not to be visible. There's other examples of the station where things have not been well coordinated, but I'm not going to get into that. But there's that's kind of to tie it back to UX design. I think all those disciplines we talked about earlier are at the service of UX design, but in fact, they're not in isolation. Like lighting design is UX design, of course, but it's in this particular context is this sort of multi-layered design approach that is US design. And it's the careful orchestration of all these design specialty that constitutes, in my mind, the experience design in the built environment. So the same way you would assemble ingredients in specific quantities to make a recipe, you could just take a pinch of acoustic design and a cup of structural engineering, and poof, you get the Fulton Center. Of course, that's not the case, and if you apply pre-made recipes, then you burn your cookies, or worse, you burn your building, or worse, you end up with things like these that from 2 weeks ago, the headquarters at JP Morgan. But anyway, enough on that. I'm going to talk about some projects. This is the new Terminal 1 at JFK, where Arup is leading the design and delivery of the cultural program. So another rendering here, but I'm not going to read through this, but this was more or less the brief from JFK and TO, our client, which is to deliver an outstanding and unique passenger experience for both arriving and departing passengers, so curb to gate and gate to curb, whether they are international or New Yorkers. So this is our team. Arup is leading the whole program, and we're integrating the whole program, but also designing the digital experience systems for it, so doing AV design for it. Our partners are Pentagram, which I'm sure a lot of you know. Actually, one of the partners, Michael Beirut, was on Future Spaces a few weeks ago, and is working on the overall branding and the digital media integration for this with Carlson Walker and We Should Do It All other smaller design studios that we're working with for some of the branded elements. Culture Core, our lead curator for all the art commissions that I'll get to in a moment. Gentilhomme, our a great Montreal-based digital media and experience design studio that are producing the content, the video content for this, and Morgan, who is our consultant for construction management. This is generally how it articulates itself, right? So 3 buckets: art, branding, digital experience. Like I was saying, branding is sort of subcategorized into 2 things. There's the branded elements, which are more the installations in the built environment that you'll be able to experience, but also all the corporate brands, so all the branding system, the type, all the graphic design, the uniforms, the business cards, and everything. So under our remit of the cultural program, are sort of 3 principles that encompasses those 3 buckets. There's user experience, that basically guest experience is at the driver of all design decisions. The program is cohesive. It serves the brand strategy, the pillars, and the brand voice. And the program is physically balanced along the passenger journey, and most importantly, carefully architecturally integrated into the base building. So some of the early passenger journey diagrams we developed in the strategy and concept phase to sort of map emotions, the key moment in the passenger journey, along the departure sequence and the arrival sequence. And I'll get into one of the pieces I can share in detail, which is a collaboration with between Arup and Pentagram in the departures hall. We call it Leaving New York. So in the background there, you see, I don't know if you can see my mouse, by the way. No, you can't. Maybe here you can. In the background, you can see one of the world's largest split flap displays. So one of those old school rotating displays, and used to tell train information, etc. So it doesn't provide flight or train information, but cycles through New York City and New York State imagery with that very characteristic and quite nice flapping sound. This is one half of it. There's the symmetrical image on the other side of the departures hall. The display itself is about 30 feet tall, I think. I can't remember actually, but the corresponding is a digital piece overhead that we call the digital ribbons that emerges out of those the architectural finish that's there, and cycles through ambient skies throughout the day that correspond to the scene that's displayed on the split flap display. And so this Leaving New York experience is, we hope, delivered in a synchronized and holistic manner to the passengers as they make their way through security. This is another shot of it. and some more detail about those 6 sky scenes that we're matching with various imagery. And it's not going to be just Empire State Building, but any like a whole range of images throughout the city and the state, plus an extra more like rare scenes that I'm not going to talk about now, but I hope you run into them and see those little Easter eggs when it opens. Little peek behind the scenes here. To generate the digital display pattern, we use the combo workflow between Grasshopper and Touch Designer to be able to manipulate have sort of like high level handles on the gradient along that surface, and see in real time how video would map to it and read to it. So these two things are sort of mutually exclusive in the capabilities of both software. So we created this pipeline to be able to help with that, and it was actually quite helpful. This is some shots of the mock-up of a display section. So display is about 8 feet tall and 120 feet long. This is just a fraction of it. High level, since we did the systems design, this is sort of the system architecture there. There's those 2 pieces I was talking about, split flap and digital, but there's a few more that I had to anonymize. Unfortunately, I can't talk about them yet, but they all, operate under a scheduler and content manager that sort of runs the show throughout the whole terminal. That defines when playback is scheduled at what time, but it's also taking real-time information from airport databases for some of the generative content. One of these pieces is a multi-channel audio piece that Arup designed and produced. So that's one thing that we produced all the way through. That's going to be a series of natural immersive soundscapes of New York State. So here are pictures of us traveling around New York State earlier this year, doing 3D recordings and underwater recordings and that kind of stuff, and having a lot of fun. Okay, so a big part of the program is, actually a major part of the program is the art commissions, right? And here are the 7 artists that are commissioned to create work for T1. Kelly Akashi, Yinka Shinobare, Tomas Saraceno, Woody Diothello, Ilana Safdie, Fairly Bias, and Julie Curtis. And you will find more info online about descriptions of all the pieces that they have commissioned, but we can't share visuals just yet, unfortunately. But look them up. Their work is amazing. It's mosaic, painting, sculpture work, and it's going to be sort of peppered through the whole passenger journey. This is one rendering of the meet and greet area with actually 2 massive pieces of hanging art. This is a placeholder. This is not what it's going to look like. But on both sides of the exit door, where there's going to be an anamorphic display that sort of welcome people and onward to their journey in New York, there's going to be those 2 big pieces of hanging art. Real quick, our team, this is how the team is made up. So Arup is leading the design of the cultural program. And again, those 3 buckets of branding, art, digital experience. So for branding, it's those agencies I was talking about before. Culture Core, lead curator, working some various technical advisors. Digital experience was designed and now is produced by Gentilhomme and with the partnership of the CMS designer and programmer. And then there's another sort of slew of disciplines that Arup has been sort of I don't know what the word is, but snowballing expands across some of the last 3 years. We've been sort of recruiting people from the structures, the lighting, the electrical team to help us take this design to each time to the next phase. And they're helping us a lot with permitting with the Port Authority that we are responsible for as well, who is basically the landlord of our client, JFK New Terminal 1. So JFK also, New Terminal 1 has the team of fabricators and builders that are going to build the program that we designed. But I think it's important to know that we're completely separated from the base building design build team, and our stuff will fit in their building. So I think that's an interesting nuance there, which is not always how it's structured. All right, take a sip of water. And that's it for JFK. I wanted to talk to you about another project that we're invested in at the moment, which is the revitalization and resilience improvements of the Riverwalks in Downtown Providence. I'm showing you a little rendering here, but I'll get into the details. So Providence, located here, of course, Narragansett Bay. If we zoom in a little bit, this is sort of what's around our project site. So we're working on the river walks here around this basin area, but this is sort of what's around. This is generally inscribes itself into the broader downtown area that has those those landmarks around the train station, Kennedy Plaza, RISD's not too far, the Rhode Island State House, etc. And here's a little overview of our site. I'm going to scrub through a little faster. Just a little drone shot gives you a sense of scale. I think it's quite a nice video. Yeah, so it's a beautiful area at the heart of the city, really. And our experience design work, so the remit again is to revitalize the area, right? So what does that mean? So our experience design work began with a series of interviews and pace of regular meetings organized by the city with us to collect people's opinion and ideas about how they experience the space and how they want the space to change and what needs to change. And so we were able to develop a series of user types that help us, sort of put together the frameworks of the user experience and solidify the user experience goals for the site. The idea, of course, again, is to make this framework as broad and intersectional as possible. And so doing this, we can collect people's insights on their experience of the site, and their responses are directly informing the design concepts that we put together, and some of the parameters that are going to drive the rest of the design. I think it's important to note that Providence is a very diverse city. It's got this is the distribution from the 2022 census, and so that's very important to take into account and sort of cross correlate that with who shows up to the city meetings and whose opinion are we collecting. Another tool that we use for user research are these mapping observation surveys, you could call them. So really going super precise and high res on what people are doing on our site. So, man sits on the bench for 15 minutes, walks around, runs alone, vomits in the bin, and then leaves, like this kind of stuff. And so figuring out what people actually use the site for is incredibly important, especially for some of our team is local, but I'm not local and I don't come to this site every day. So it's harder for me to understand what actually this site's about without these tools that are made with our local community engagement partner. So here's the site again, and this photo sort of depicts the challenge quite well. I think it's like a quite attractive waterfront area. But generally, the takeaway, and I think you can tell from this photo, is that no one's there. It's empty. No one shows up. It's completely devoid of human activity, and feels like a bit of like a sunken fortress that's separated from the rest of downtown by this giant Memorial Boulevard right on the right here. It's not visible from the street. There's no intuitive access, and that's kind of where we come in. That was the why the city hired us, is to bring people back to this area. So people have described it as being a non-place. It is known to be a heat island. There's a lot of hard surfaces. It is not accessible easily. It floods regularly, and there's low visibility. People feel unsafe, going under the bridges. And so those are the challenges, and that informs the goal that we want to put into doing work there, right? I'm not going to read through all of them, but basically increasing the opportunity for placemaking and reopening this place for people to use, and for this to become a vibrant part of the city center. This is the makeup of our team. On the left are all the disciplines that Arup is covering, and on the right are some of our external partners. And so I think it's another interesting case where Arup sort of coordinates the entire delivery and is the main lead designer. And that way we can do some of the engineering, leave some to others, have some specialties that we want to pull in and out, and orchestrate the whole thing. So once the team is there, how do we develop develop the design? And I think this is where the experience design team comes in, is to set the tone and generate the overall narrative that the design is going to have to respond to. And so to do that, we had to zoom out and move back. We looked at basically the largest timescale we could possibly imagine on this site, and what it meant to look at this before Europeans settled in the area, but even before humans were in this area, before even life itself. We're looking at a series of concentric timescales here that are sort of our entryway into relating to the environment on a temporal arc that existed long before us, will exist long after us, and reinscribing the site into sort of a meaningful framework there. And so the dynamics that govern elements and life on this site are a system. Did you guys see this thing? I should have. Okay. Do you guys see those notifications? I want to turn that off. I apologize. Right, so those timescales are geological, the biggest sort of arc low frequency we can imagine. But then if you zoom in, human fluctuation throughout, like human eras, seasonal throughout the year, like fish flowing upstream, or leaves turning, etc. Things that happen monthly or daily, like tide movements, or even subdaily. You know, like we have, there's a lot of life going on at a microscopic level that is where there's a lot of activity happening at super high frequency that we don't even perceive. And so what's the through line of this whole thing? It's basically the water that was there long before we got here, and that will be there long after we leave. And so let's look at the history of water on this site. This is an overlay of the current site with what used to be there before Europeans started settling here. And so the Great Salt Cove, it's basically the convergence of two bodies of water, and this is sort of the oldest documented form of body we got on the site. The Great Salt Cove here abuts the Narragansett Bay, and both rivers that flow on our site, the Woonasquatucket and Moshessuck, River, that pour into the bay in the south. And it's an important sort of nexus there because we got those two rivers flowing into the bay. In terms of natural habitat, it's an important and significant series of ecosystems that happen there, but also for it also happens to be more or less at the junction between the overall map of two Native American tribes. So this is a nexus between confluence of freshwater, saltwater, tidal movements, because it's a tidal estuary, but also a cultural exchange and commerce between human populations that go way back in history, and that we want to bring back to the sort of themes that we want to infuse with the design. And so meeting waters is how we call this overall narrative for this design, is then broken up into a series of sub themes. But meeting water, I think it is good to encompass the whole principle that we decide to adopt, right? So it's just like nature meets nature. We got the two rivers coming in, we got birds coming to fish, that kind of stuff. Nature meets humans, and humans meet other humans there, which is really what we're trying to bring back to the site. And it's important to do this because we don't want our design to happen in isolation and just fix the mistakes that someone else has done in the past, right? Like the design that was made in the 90s, not even talking about the I-95 on the west side, another great urban design move to sort of like create a big scar in the middle of the city to divide it further. That's not even in our scope, but it's important to recognize the site history, and something that goes way back in the past and looks further to the future was sort of the goal that we set ourselves to do, and the way we do this is developing this narrative and how it articulates itself into all these themes here that are around natural history, but not only, right? And so this is sort of the product of our historical research that articulates itself into this frameworks of 8 themes, and the goal is that all these become physical manifestation. Like this whole thing sort of ties the site together as like a one thread, and that elements around the site are physical manifestations that emerge out of this thread to create meaningful user touch points in this built environment. And so in a nutshell, this is it'll manifest itself particularly in these components of the design and the programming. So including but not limited to, a series of meandering paths, restoring the porosity of the site, the accessibility to the site, connecting it to the wider urban trail network. There's a bunch of the Woonasquatucket River Greenway on the west, where there's a lot of mixed-use paths with bike lanes and a lot of connection, like much more intense connection to nature over there. We want to connect to that. Bioremediation solutions and introducing other or rather encouraging recruitment from shellfish and other species to clean the water, because this was a polluted waterway for a long time because of all the industries that used to be implanted around there. The Meeting Waters framework is going to infuse the architectural expression around the site, the landscape. I want to talk particularly about the elevation of the river walks. There's I don't know if I have a slide about this actually. I have a visual of, oh, here we go. Yeah. This is what they call the 10-year flood event. So like the biggest flood event that happens on average every 10 years. But what this is going to become in the 2050s and 2070s with sea level rise. And so this is more or less where we're headed, which is quite dramatic. But the goal, if I go back to my slide here, elevation of the river walks throughout is part of the plan for sure, to make sure it's resilient for those waters rising. Interpretive signage that we're designing, some little DIY gathering spaces supported by AV technology, so people can really appropriate the site and make it their own, schedule their little yoga class or little poetry reading or whatever the case might be. A very extensive dynamic and layered lighting program that's going to tie the site together. A lot of opportunities for events and performances, community activations, et cetera, et cetera. Soundscaping is another one. So that's all a series of, the main things we're touching when we're designing the site. Here are some drawings by our landscape architect, Stimson, that I thought were quite pretty, looking south and looking north. So we're sort of deep in design, so all I can share really is renderings at this point, but you can see some of the changes that are going to be brought to the area, particularly on this slide with the elevated river walks here that I was just talking about. An entirely new bridge is going to be built here designed by Inform, our architect partner. And a whole other series of other experiential things around the site that hopefully will bring people back to the area. I'm going to finish talking about a personal project of mine. So this is outside of Arup. I'm part of an artist group called Collective Scope, and our work is about our collaborative relationship with different kinds of users in the built environment, the non-human, or what we call them more than human agents, and more particularly the microbial populations of the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn, which is much like the Woonasquatucket River in Providence, a heavy polluted tidal estuary, suffering from the same symptomatic sort of industrial revolution consequences. And Elizabeth Hanaff, one of the members of our team, is a professor at Tandon School of Engineering at NYU, and has been studying the microbial systems in the canal for the last over 10 years, actually. And her research has demonstrated that not only the canal is full of life, which something is seen as very, very dead, is actually full of life, but not only that, but also the microbes have evolved to develop functions to actually metabolize and remediate the toxic trace that we left in the canal over the past 150 years. And so it comes at a particular time where the canal is being dredged, and this remediation activity, it's going to be dredged and kept with concrete because it's been rezoned, and there's like fancy condos that are going to be built on the site. And so the product of about 150 years of evolution suddenly and very violently being sort of brought to a halt, just as property value skyrocketing next to it, and the canal has long been declared a Superfund site by the EPA. And so our work is about just that. It's about sort of our fraught relationship between those unusual but very resilient users of the built environment, and with the notions of toxicity, of gentrification, and collaboration potentially, or maybe it's exploitation. That's something to be determined, but with other species in the built environment, including those very small organisms. So generally our work includes large-scale prints. This is a sort of scale map of the Gowanus Canal that we made out of steel, and some live sediment, actually jars of live Gowanus Canal water and sediment, and that usually evolve with the show. So this is our latest show. It was at Biobat Art Space at Brooklyn Army Terminal, closed earlier this year. And it's sort of the bigger, dirtier version of it, with like a series of large 200-gallon tanks of Gowanus Canal sludge and water, but also some immersive soundscape and generative projection, basically creating this space of calm and reflection around, our relationship with those organisms. And this is all I wanted to talk to you about today. So thanks for listening.
All right, Leo, amazing. This is great. I have many questions, but I will also open it up to the community here. If you have questions, feel free to go on camera, raise your hand. We can kind of call on you. You can shout it out. Everett, you had a question there in the chat.
Yeah, it was just I was wondering. You mentioned that you were working with Public Records a while ago for their audio systems, and I wondered if you guys had hosted anything with that Gowanus group over there, just because they're in the same region.
Oh, because they're so close. No, we
Yeah.
we haven't, but that's an interesting idea. Yeah, it's also I just want to clarify, we didn't design the audio system. We designed the acoustics for the room. The audio is all them with a separate partner. But yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
So, actually, one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit was when you were talking about the sphere. You were talking about sort of you're trying to figure out things in a space that hadn't been built yet. I would imagine a lot of the work that you're doing is on a sort of a space and a volume and an experience that like there's no precedent for. And I saw that you have the Arup soundstage, but I'm just kind of curious, like what is prototyping, what is like testing for like an unbuilt space like that look like?
Yeah. So, well, I think I could answer this with two ways, right? In general terms, it is the architect's job to do this visualization, right? We were working with Populous, who was the main architect for this. Our remit was the acoustics and the AV systems for it. And so I think the way I can answer that is talking about the acoustics of the space and how we.
Yeah, that's actually what I'm curious about, because they're so unknown.
Yeah. So there's the way it's built is like a concentric sphere. There's the outside sphere that has this giant Seiko series of this digital screen, right, that you see from the outside, and then a structure, a series of catwalks, and then what they call the media plane, which is what you see from the inside, which is much smaller actually, and that is acoustically transparent, or at least we made sure of that. We did a whole lot of testing with large pieces of that LED screen behind those speakers, including the ones that are used for the emergency system, but also the holoplot, right, the main show system, that's the spatialized audio system, to make sure that system could actually, those speakers could be there but not be seen in front of the LEDs. We did extensive modeling, like the ray tracing things I was showing in the beginning, kind of a more comprehensive version of that with like full ray tracing simulation, including diffraction on surfaces, all the finishes and all that geometry is much more complex, which is what, yeah, so that's for designing the audio system and the acoustics, because the goal was to get an environment that was quite dead, right? Like quite dry, so that you don't get the room effect and you can add anything you want, kind of like a movie theater. And so behind this media surface, there's about, I think, a series of like 4 to 6 inch, or maybe 2 feet, actually, I don't remember, but like really thick acoustic panels that you don't see, that are there to sort of bring everything down. And so that's the product of a series of calculation, simulation, and listening to it in the sound lab. And you can model the acoustics of the room at different receiver locations, but also considering all the audio sources that are going to go around it. And the holoplot system is a pretty complex audio system, because there's all those environmental arrays that surround the audience. So it's actually quite an extensive modeling process that is yeah, that's it. I don't know.
And how accurate was it? Like once you actually got it, when you actually experienced it, like when was it pretty accurate to all the modeling?
I think it was. That's what I've heard. So I wasn't there during the sort of like I'm in the sound lab, and then I'm in this space to be able to compare. But from what I've heard from our colleague Joe, who led that, is that was pretty accurate actually. And we're able to well, the sound lab is a calibrated room too. It's very quiet, and that's a way to make sure that a certain sound level isn't polluted by background noise, and that you can hear things that at the actual level you would hear them in the space, including things that are very quiet. And so from that point on, everything else is calibrated to it. Therefore, the levels are what they will be in the real space. Plus the fact that this ambisonic format that we're using is actually an approximation, but still an approximation of a physical, like a physical sound field and what it would be in the space. It's not a rendering like an Atmos type thing. It's an actual physical sound field, and it comes from how the sound field is decomposed on a series of spherical functions, whatever. But that's sort of how it goes. So it's pretty accurate, actually. Yeah.
That's amazing. Rebecca, you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Leo. Thank you so much for your talk. When you were talking about the airport and
Yep.
the passenger journey in the airport, it makes me think a lot about security and how maybe that's a very unpleasant experience for
Yeah.
any people. But
Mhm.
obviously, y'all don't have control over, that specific part in the journey. So as you all are thinking about the airport, how are you designing for that constraint? Is it something you just kind of have to ignore? Or are you sort of like, oh, like people are probably going to be frustrated after they come out of security, so we should make sure they feel extra good afterwards? Like, how do you sort of navigate those
Yeah.
larger constraints in the journey?
Thank you for that. It's really important to think about the stuff we can't influence too. I mean, we're not designing the full airport, and zero chance we can influence how TSA operates, right? And so the I think the only thing we can do is being aware of the emotional state that people are likely to be experiencing, or that certain user groups will be likely to be experiencing this particular moment. That's true also in the immigration hall. I mean, I used to be on a visa, and every time I would come to New York, I would have to wait in like 3 hours every time, coming back from Christmas or whatever, which is a horrible experience, right? Especially this is going to be the only international only terminal, so likely people will have traveled from a long way. I think the best we can do, because we have no influence about how those government agencies are run, is to make sure we are not. I think we make sure we're aware of the emotional load that everybody carries at that moment, but also that we're not trying to pretend that we can solve, right? Like, it's not because you put a pretty picture on a wall that you're going to solve how frustrating it is to pass security, which I think it was your point, right? And I completely agree with that. I think sort of remaining a little humble about what you can do when you can't do with these things is important. We're designing a cultural program, right? We're not designing how the airport operates. In fact, we're designing everything but the way the airport operates. So sort of remain realistic with what you can operate, what you have influence over, because when you do have influence over something, then suddenly you have a whole lot of design challenges that you have to really consider carefully, right? Like, if you're going to design the like bench example earlier is a good case, right? If you have the power to design a bench, then you have the responsibility to design it well. We don't have the power to design really like 90% of the experience that people are going to have when they're going through security.
All right, fantastic. Vipa, you had a question.
Hi, yes, that was such a great presentation. And my question was, when you see the like integration of sound design and like spatial design, like, do you ever find it that you're coming into the process too late to like retrofit into like ideal acoustic situations? And like, have you seen that change over time, getting like involved earlier in a project?
It definitely happens that things have moved on past the point where you can't change, or at least you can't achieve your stakeholders or your client's vision because some decisions have been made. We do try to get involved as early in the concept process as possible, because we can inform those things and catch them before it's too late. I don't know that I could. Actually, no, actually, you're right. The In our team, that's definitely the trend now, is to get involved early in strategy so that we can influence these things. I think the sound, it doesn't really apply only to acoustics or sound. I think it applies to a whole lot of decisions. Somebody made a decision to put a certain finish at a certain place. Well, I can't put a screen there, or I can't put a certain device there, or it will limit the way people are going to flow. Like, if we're talking about like real sort of nuts and bolts of the touch points that go in the environment, it happens all the time. And maybe the being aware of the experience you deliver and the functionality you deliver all the way through is what's key there, and also managing your clients' expectations, of course.
Yeah, I also see it even like on top of that, even with like the storytelling. So if it's like you have voices coming in versus like music, or like
Right.
what to optimize for what frequency. But yeah,
Totally.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real example where you're going to be yeah, there's just making sure, yeah, we can't do everything if the design decisions have already been made for sure. And this is sort of the idea of total design, I think, is also making sure that understanding this complex tangled system of a lot of design decisions and being able to understand if you pull on that string what other things are going to happen down the line, right? If you want speech to be there, but then you have to move that, but it also means that this system is going to have to be implemented there, which means that the IT closet needs to come closer, like all that stuff is really complex and tangled, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
Janelle, you have a question. Hope you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Yes, I sure do. First of all, I just wanted to thank you guys so much, Josh, for having Leonard here. Or am I saying it right, Leonard? Leonard? How do you say it?
No, yeah.
For having you. This was so cool and such a deep dive into the way that the teams are like the way that the amount of interdisciplinary knowledge comes together to do such complex and massive, like such massive scopes of work. I was super fascinated by that part, and especially as somebody who's sort of just hungry to understand more about different frameworks and collaborative work, when especially as in this wild world of is something that combines, yes, architecture, interior design, graphics, community envisioning, and like deep research, as well as industrial design and everything. Okay, first, I guess two-part question. One is, if you were on an entry-level side of somebody who aspires to do this level of multidisciplinary work, one day even having perhaps something like an Arup of their own, but would like to learn sort of within an existing structure for some time to like before launching into that. Given how many specializations are a part of it, and given that you have to have a little bit of an understanding of all of those specializations in order to direct a team accordingly, where would you say is the best place to, like, in what kind of role would you say is the best place to start that learning process if you were working for somebody else, like coming into an Arup or coming into a similar type of multidisciplinary design firm? What's the best place to begin that journey that helps with that?
Well, yeah, that's super interesting. I think I would imagine that for the sort of generalist approach, working at an architecture firm might be probably like the way to go because of how they kind of have their hands in every possible aspect of the built environment, because typically they sit at the top of the design team and sort of federate the whole thing. And this is kind of a way you get to, I would say, probably the quickest way you get to both be involved at concept level, but be involved at interfacing with all the multi-disciplines, right? I think the Arup does that in some way because it's a large firm that has a lot of technical disciplines, and we can sort of like infer a design lead approach to these things that then will have those multi-dis layers under it. But I have to say that the way I got into it was sort of like through the technical specialty. And that might just be a product of how it was structured at that time, at that place, at Arup or something. So I don't know if that would be sort of the safe way to start. I would say something where you like, what's the most generalist? To me, it would be an architecture or interior design or that kind of work, or even exhibit design probably is a good one too, design strategy, and the pentagrams and the like. Yeah.
Totally. So like coming in, going for like kind of like an associate like type or assist, I don't even know what do you even call that and the entry level job title to search for
it depends on each. This is something I don't actually know how that rolls in other firms. Maybe other people can answer that. Can do.
I mean, I could probably chime in a little bit just because I hire a lot of folks. I'd say so. Do you know the idea of the McKinsey T?
Never heard of it.
Yeah. Look at, I mean, it's, like McKinsey, what are you going to say about them? But like, if you look at the McKinsey T, basically it's this idea of like people have sort of a broad range of skills and then one specialty, like one area that they're just like a killer at. So it's like, if you like really, really understand technology, you really, really understand like a thing, like that's usually the point where you enter into a group like that because you have a very specific specialization that they can hire for. But then you have sort of a broad range of knowledge at the top. And so like that's the easiest thing to plug into an organization if your skill sets are kind of like that. The
Gotcha.
other thing is if you have more of a generalized skill set, then like, there's like generalist roles sometimes in these agencies that are like essentially like producers and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But you can usually kind of get in that way if you don't have like a technical or design or architectural skill set that like plugs in there. Sometimes project management, production, that sort of stuff is like a good place to start and feel at an organization. But I would also just say like, small organizations move fast and let you try different roles. You can grow. Big organizations give you a lot of, you can see a lot of things.
Yeah.
And like
Cool.
sometimes very, very storied organizations are actually horrible to work for. So talk to me. Look at, get yourself a Glassdoor account. Anyway, that's, oh, sorry, I didn't jump into that one.
Thank you for that though. That was extremely helpful.
Okay, but I burned out the last minute of questions. So Leo, I will hand it over to you to kind of give a sign off today. How can people help you, support you, keep the conversation going?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I'll say is that I only shared some very large projects except for the last bit at the end. And I just want to mention that I'm interested in projects of all sizes and working with you on anything that you have. And actually the smaller and the most bespoke, the better. Any idea that you might have that fits in the sort of physical space of built environment, would love to hear from you, or even if there's more questions after that. That's it. Yeah, and thanks for coming.
Amazing. Leo, thanks so much. Thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful week. I will hopefully see some of you guys next week. It should be a great one. Have a wonderful time. See you at a future spaces. See you everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Jeff.